Today, I am honored to be joined by Janet Chan. Born and raised in Los Angeles, Janet grew up pursuing her dream of becoming an artist. Her journey would lead her to becoming a storyboard artist at Disney, but after obtaining this role, she realized this is not the life that she wanted to be living. Thus, in her 20s, she quit her job at Disney to become a full-time content creator. Now, with her partner Vincent, the two of them create content around the beauty of slow living, how to turn your side hustle into your full-time business, and much more. Today, we sit down to discuss the absolute joy that comes from betting on yourself, and how if you never take that chance and you never take that risk, you will never know what you could truly become. If you enjoyed today's show and you want to see even more incredible conversations with amazing guests, please follow along and leave a rating. It is the best way to help grow the show, and I can't thank you enough for being a supporter. Thank you for tuning in to the Art20s podcast. Without further ado, Janet Chan.
I always love people that find their passion early on in life, and it sounds like that's exactly what it was for you. You found your passion for art in particular, and you said you found it through MMORPGs, which I think is really cool because I don't think a lot of people my age especially really play MMOs anymore. I know like Final Fantasy 14 is still pretty big, like the Elder Scrolls Online, a lot of people will play, but everybody's obsessed with like Fortnite still. You'd be surprised how many people are still playing Fortnite and just all the big AAA types of games, but nobody's really appreciating the art style for the MMORPG. I want to know, what was it about them that you really appreciated their art style versus the traditional AAA game, and what inspired you to really want to follow that and get into art?
It wasn't necessarily any one art style. I think it started with Final Fantasy games for me. And then my parents were not exactly really big into spending money on video games. So that just led myself into MMOs because a lot of the ones that I would like were free. I wasn't paying for them. And I gravitated towards a lot of the Asian ones, um, partly because I'm a huge fan of anime, have always been. Um, but I never really thought I could ever work in anime specifically unless I moved to Japan, or like that was just not in the realm of reality for me. But with video games, um, because I was aware of AAA video games here in the States, I felt like, well, I might not be working on an MMO, but I would possibly be working for something. Because at the time, with video games like Final Fantasy, I feel like a lot of AAA games were heading towards that visual direction, anyways. Um, and I think in high school, for me and my age demographic, it felt like it was really advertised as entertainment artistry, entertainment design became a huge career that I think I didn't realize was viable, um, but it felt like a practical way to convince myself, my parents, that I wasn't going to be a starving artist. I wasn't going to be a fine artist selling paintings by the beach or something like that. So it was kind of like a compromise that I had with myself as well as my parents.
And I know you've been very open about the relationship that you have with your parents, and you grew up in a community that really pushed this hyper competitive mentality. And you've been open about how it drove you to develop this sense in yourself of almost an imposter syndrome, where you felt like you needed to have an incredible work ethic and really go in deep into your pursuits and your passions because you needed to be at the top of what you were doing. And we've seen time and time again that can lead to burnout. And later on in your story, it does lead to burnout. Do you think that if at that time in your life, you would have just had somebody come up to you and say, hey, you're doing great just the way that you are, it would have changed the course of events differently?
That's an interesting question. I was literally writing a YouTube script before jumping on this call with you about that. But I actually didn't think of that at all. I think if I was in the middle of pursuing everything that I wanted to pursue, I don't think anyone could have said anything to me that would have changed my mind. Um, I think my beliefs at the time and how intensely I identified with my work ethic, um, but not even really with my work ethic, with my workaholism, it just became so much a part of my identity that I don't know if I could have saw it any other way. I just knew that this is how I was brought up. This is how my parents taught me to be. This is what gave me a lot of self worth in life, is to work hard and to chase after this thing really intensely. Um, I think there were many times in I think my pursuit of my dreams where I had a lot of mentors that have actually said similar things to me. Like, they would encourage my work ethic, because in some ways it's a really good thing in competitive fields. But they would also say, like, you're good enough, right? you know you are worthy of whatever it is that you're looking for, and it doesn't mean you have to kill yourself just to get it. And I think part of me didn't really believe them. Like, it would affect me emotionally. Like, I needed to hear those words. I would almost cry sometimes when I was in like really stressful situations, and they would say those things to me. But I think because I felt so much imposter syndrome, and because I still felt like I needed to be that way in order to prove myself, I didn't really let it like sink in until I think it was time. I felt ready to accept those things.
I know in my experiences, I'm not much of an artist myself. I was much more of the athlete growing up. And from the conversations that I've had with athletes and just my general friends that I had through sports, there's this connection that comes with your passion and the identity that you find yourself having, where you completely get lost in this one aspect of your life and you tie your identity to it and you tie your self worth to it. Where you say that if I can't perform at the highest level, then I'm not worth as much as my teammate, as my competitor, or something like that. And I know at a young age myself, I especially did that, where I call it the plight of the perfectionist, where I certainly had this perfectionist mentality when I was going through sports, when I was going through my academics, when I got to college, where I would tie this one aspect of my life to my self worth and I would ignore the rest of the world around me and everything else that I might have been doing correctly or I might have been improving on, but I wasn't really cognizant to it because I was so focused on this one aspect. Do you think that was the same case with you, where your identity was something that was solely tied to your pursuit of the arts? That even though you might have had amazing aspects of your character, amazing relationships, just a well rounded life going on, that this was the sole focus of things that might have blocked out all those amazing things from coming through?
I think when you discover your passions really early on like that, I wouldn't even consider it like discovering my passions, because it happened so early on. It just felt like a part of me.
Yeah.
Um, but I think that the identity part of it comes from when it's one of the only things you receive a lot of praise for growing up. I think it wasn't so much that, like, because I actually be, because I came from such a competitive environment, I wasn't considered like the best artist of my town or my school. So I didn't have that kind of ego that I know a lot of other artists and other people who excel at one thing tend to have,
Mhm.
especially when they go to college or compete. Uh, but it was something that I started identifying with personally, like my personality, everything, as I, in a weird way, became a black sheep in my general group of friends. Everyone was like either going to Ivy Leagues, or if not Ivy Leagues, they were I don't know, trying to be doctor, lawyer, accountant, a normal, a more normal career than being like, I want to work in Hollywood.
Yeah.
Um, and I think part of that contributed to the imposter syndrome. And I kind of wore it on my sleeve, because on one side, I had a whole community that like didn't really respect what I did, didn't really think I was going to go anywhere with it. Um, there were a lot of other better artists than me out there, even in like high school and stuff. So I just felt like I needed to prove myself, and I needed to like one of my family members said like they don't think I'm an artist because I don't draw enough. And I was like, so imagine hearing that and being like, but that is what I am, and then having to double down and be like, this is what I want to do. I am
Yeah.
an artist, and that's what defines me. And then there's a whole other side, especially when I was going to college, where like everyone um wanted to be the best artist, and they were the best artists of their high school, and they were, from my eyes, they were so confident in being an artist, and define, like, in a weird way you had to be a certain way um to fit the stereotype. You had to dress a certain way, you had to act a certain way, be into certain music, like, so being experiencing both worlds, I definitely felt like I had to fill some kind of role, and I adopted a certain identity that was like hyper competitive, and uh, just kind of wore being an artist on my sleeve. So when I felt like I didn't really identify with that anymore as I got older, um, and then left the industry, I just felt like such a, in a weird way, like I was mourning the death of my younger self in a weird way.
Yeah. I think that's beautifully said. And that's the thing that compelled me to reach out to you is there were so many people around you who wanted you to fit this mold or this label that they wanted to place on you. And you eventually said, absolutely not. That is not who I'm going to be. I'm not going to let you define my life and what I pursue. And that's something so bold and so beautiful. And so many people aren't willing to take that risk. And I think it's because they don't fully believe in themselves. But I think that's something we'll come to a bit later on when we get to that part of your story. I want to focus on the college part of everything because I think that's something a lot of young people can relate to is they get forced into going to college and they get billed that this is going to be this amazing thing that you kind of have to do if you want to get to that next step in your life, but that's not really the case. And you end up going to a prestigious art institution and sure, it does live up to the experience. You get the education that you're looking for. You start to realize what you might be looking for in terms of being an artist. You get exposed to different forms of art, which is a beautiful thing. But the art school itself, it's kind of give or take as to whether or not it was worth the experience. It's a lot of money to go to the school in the first place, as it is to go to a lot of universities. The art school, when you're all said and done, I saw the picture that you had on your Instagram. They gave you a vertical diploma, which is like a nice little thank you. That's a new one. That was an interesting one. Um, and the kicker is you finish up school and you're not even guaranteed a job in the animation industry. And now you have to go through this process where you're having to put your name out there, you're having to go to recruiters, and you're trying to have to pitch yourself in a way. And this one part of your story that I think is so interesting is the testing process that you have to go through. Whereas an outsider, it sounds a lot like your summer internship or just an internship that you would take in general, but there's no guarantee that the studio is going to hire you afterwards. And to me, it sounds like a lot like the studio is just finding a way that they can cut costs and in this case have no cost at all and just take advantage of talent that they know is really good and they can get for free. When you are so passionate and now it's time to try and monetize that passion. I've heard this a lot from creatives where there's a difference between doing it as a hobby and just as a passion. And then when it finally comes time to monetize it, especially for somebody else in the corporate environment, that's where that can start to dwindle that passion that you had for it in the first place. Was that what it was like for you, especially going through that testing process where you're having to go through it over and over again? I think you said you did maybe like 13 to 15 of these tests before you finally broke in. Was it just degrading? Did you find any positives out of that experience in terms of just getting work in the first place? Or was it something that was just a complete shock?
Going into the industry, I knew that that's part of breaking in. My teachers were very open about tests are a thing, and that's part of it. It sucks. None of us really want to do it. That's
Yeah.
what we have. That's what we build portfolios for. Like, you give samples of your work so people know what they're hiring you for. Why then do we have to also do a week-long test where we have to prove ourselves on the job? It's very strange. Um, it's the only industry I've worked in that does that. You know, like I've freelanced and I've worked for other industries before, and they don't do that. They see your portfolio and then they go like, yeah, sure, I like your work. Come work for
Yeah.
us. We'll test you out. And if you do a good job, they'll hire you again. If they don't, you'll never hear from them again. That is what it is. And that's most jobs. That's if you hire someone to fix the toilet in your house. That's like you don't test them
Yeah.
before they like, do you really know how to fix my toilet or what? Um so I knew that that's a reality, and it's not going to change just because I don't want it to. Or like there's some people who go like, well, I don't want to take tests because I find it abusive. Well, good for you, but like not everyone has the luxury of doing that, especially if you're straight out of school. um I think because I was so desperate to prove myself at the time, I was willing to do anything and everything to get hired. And I think that's a lot of people who want to work in Hollywood. I think the industry has a particular allure um, that I think maybe not all industries have, that you're willing to withstand a certain amount of abuse
Yeah.
just to work in it. Um, and you understand that's part of it. So it didn't discourage me. Um, I feel like maybe that because I was in a weird way, it was so normalized by my teachers and by everyone that's ever talked to me about what it takes to get in, that it sh- I was desensitized. I should have actually been discouraged and a little demoralized that this is part of it. Like this should have given me hints to how the industry is. But because it was so normalized, I was like, it is what it is. I gotta do what I gotta do to get in, I guess. So yeah.
Absolutely. Where we get so desensitized to things that shouldn't be that the way that they are because we've accepted them as a culture or as a society for so long that we just say we kind of shrug and we're like, okay, that's just how it is. I'm gonna have to roll with the punches just like everyone else did. And it's until the younger generations start to realize, actually, maybe it doesn't have to be that way, and we can start initiating that change right now. Then you initiate the change, and then so forth. You go forth in the generations, and you change the culture, and that's how it gets started. You just have to make that decision yourself. And it's amazing the things that you had to go through and you didn't get discouraged. I heard your story that there's another aspect of this where you have portfolio reviews where companies will have people go out to conventions or other places where they can view your work, and there are people who don't really want to be there but they're still there getting paid to review your work. You had one person review your work and actually tell you that you should go back to school because it just wasn't that good. If that happened to me, I would have just quit on the spot. Um, it just is a true testament to your strength and your character. And I think we're leaving out another important person in the story who was there to help you get through these tough times, and that's your partner, and Vincent. And you met Vincent when you were in school, and he's been with you ever since. At that time, when you first meet him, I know we've been talking a lot about how you're dedicated in your work and you're really focused on getting to that step in your career. And I think a lot of people in their young 20s especially can relate to that sentiment. They don't want a relationship. They don't want to let anybody else in because they might be taking away from their time and their perspective, or they just want to be focused on this one aspect of their life. When you first met Vincent, did you know that it just felt different with him and that he was somebody that you really wanted to keep around? Or was there maybe like a metaphorical wall up, and over time you either had to break that wall down yourself or he broke down that wall and you realized that he was somebody that you really wanted to not just have around but keep around?
When we started dating, right before we started dating, I had made a decision to open myself up to the possibility of dating. Because up until that point, uh, I I had this 10-year plan. I was starting from I graduate high school to 10 years from then. I'm going to achieve all these great things, and in order to do that, I had to do catch up, do whatever I had to do to get there, and that included not being in a relationship. Um, but right when we were dating, I was about to graduate college. I started feeling lonely for the first time because I was that was right when I was starting to see some amount of success. It was the first time I had an interview at DreamWorks for a job, and I was still in school. I think I had maybe a year or so left before I would graduate. That gave me a lot of confidence. I didn't realize at the time. Turns out that happens all the time. You might get what you think is a big break, and it falls through. That happens all the time for so many types of jobs. And I didn't actually get hired till maybe 2 years later, something like that. But as a lot of the little seeds I had planted, all the hard work that I have put in to achieve what I wanted to achieve, as my dreams were starting to come true, I still felt empty. Um, the interview gave me a lot of satisfaction in that, like, okay, now I know I could get a job. It might take a few more um, interviews, a little bit more hard work, but I'll get there eventually. It was within the realm of possibility for me. But it was like, even then, I knew something was kind of wrong because I wasn't necessarily feeling fulfilled from any of this. Um, and then I also felt uh, upset that during my 4 years in college, I had missed out on a lot of social aspects of my early 20s, late teens, early 20s, where a lot of my friends from high school, I had lost touch with them because they would try to reach out to me, but I was always so busy. I didn't have a normal college schedule where you have winter break and summer break. My school, you could go through, like, just completely barrel through school if you wanted to, have no summer vacations, graduate in, like, some people graduate in 2 years, in 3 years, something like that, with insane work schedules. And that's what I wanted to do because you would save money that way. um I had given up a lot of summer vacations, so a lot of, like, personal things in my life that I started regretting around that time. And I just felt like, I think I'm ready to start dating. Like, that's something in my my grand 10-year plan, that maybe I was wrong. Maybe I can allow myself to have personal connections with people. And right when that happened, right when I was ready to, Vincent came along, and we just happened to get along really well. Um, but it's not like I knew he was the one or anything. I just knew, like, I'm ready now.
Yeah, it's still a beautiful thing, and I know from the male perspective, especially, I know a lot of young men my age that tell themselves that they're not ready because they're so hyper focused on their career. And I think ultimately we all will come to that realization that there's only so much fulfillment that you can get without having external relationships in your life, whether that be with a partner or whether that be developing relationships with really close friends, your family. We're not meant to be alone in the world. And until you find that fulfillment from having solid relationships, I think everyone will always have that little piece of them that might feel a little bit empty. And it's just reassuring to hear that you felt the same thing and you were able to act on it. And now we're at this part here. And throughout this time, the two of you aren't just in a relationship together, but you also have this idea that you're going to work together and you're going to start building this personal brand on the side. And it wasn't necessarily out of necessity, but it was out of passion, where you didn't want to lose touch with what was important to you, and that was creating art that spoke to you, that made you feel fulfilled, just like being with Vincent makes you feel fulfilled. So you talked about going to conventions for the first time, and you go to a convention. I think you said it was called CTN. Apologies if that's wrong, but it was a struggle at first, where you have to pay 500 just to have the booth itself. You have to do all the building of the prints. You have to build the booth to make it presentable. You have to find the color scheme that people want to see. You have to get the right attention on you. And it wasn't easy in the beginning to start your own personal business while you're trying to actually break into the industry at the same time. This is all going on in unison. How do you think you guys were able to work together in the first place? Were you able to really complement each other well, and you were able to build off each other's skill sets? Or was it just a lot of trial and error in that first place, where I know a lot of young entrepreneurs especially, if they're going through it with a partner or they're solo, there's a lot of clashing of the heads in terms of who wants to take full creative power, who wants to lead their vision this way. It seemed like you guys from the start just had a really good connection, and that's what ultimately led you to weathering the storm in the beginning, figuring out a solid process, and now you've been able to grow it to the point where you are now.
It definitely was not a smooth process at all. I think it seems that way now. I think because we've been together for so long, but also we've been working, uh, I guess, business wise together for so long, professionally.
Mm-hmm.
But like any relationship, if people are trying to go into business together, as partners or yeah, partners. I have a mentor um, who runs a pretty successful, I guess, I guess it's a school now, but before it's a production company. He used to have partners, and he realized for his personality he doesn't like that because of all the clashing. But any kind of partnership is basically a marriage, whether you're actually in a marriage together or not. It requires all the same kind of uh, patience that you have to do it, to be willing to work through all your clashes and all the problems that you're going to encounter, learning how to work together. So when we first started working together, um, the only arguments we ever really had in our relationship were work related, because we would both have ideas and we would have a vision of seeing a certain creative project a certain way. But I would disagree or he would disagree. And in order to get through it, it would require a lot of a lot of arguments, and then a lot of empathy, and then a lot of coming back together and figuring out how to compromise. Um, Eventually, I think we learned how to designate roles for each of us. I tend to be more of a leadership position in a lot of ways, simply because of my personality, and he's a lot more people pleasing, so he works better with other in a support role a lot of the times. But then we are flexible enough to kind of interchange the roles when necessary. Um, but even to this day, we'll still have arguments. And there are times when we can't do certain projects or we're delayed because of those arguments. But if you care enough about working together and each other and wanting to work with each other, and you respect the other person and what they bring to the table, I think that's more important. Because what I've learned, I tend to be a little bit of a tyrant when I'm working in a group situation. Um, and it's also hard for me to read other people's emotions sometimes. So I don't realize when I'm hurting someone else's feelings. And I've learned how, like, he can bring so much to the table that I can't in that respect. Like, he can respond to people in a better way and teach me how to be better with other people too. And I feel like I can I teach him how to be better at communication and meeting deadlines and stuff like that. So realizing and having the humility to realize that you don't know everything, and what the best part of a partnership is that there are two of you, but that's also the worst part of it as well.
Oh, that was so beautiful. I know we're talking about business, but there's so many applications to just general relationships in there where it sounded so healthy to me, where you guys can acknowledge that there are going to be arguments like they're going to be in any single relationship. But it's that empathy, it's that love for each other, it's that genuine care for one another that you want to do this together. It's not out of necessity. You're choosing to be in this relationship together, and you're going to work on this compromise and come together in a way that makes something beautiful. And that it was just really well described. And I think it's a perfect segue into the corporate world, because bad corporations, they don't have that empathy. They don't have that genuine care for the structure that they have built. It can be a my way or the highway very easily. And I think that's where they'll start to falter. And I think that's what we see in your story. But the first part of your story is you do land at DreamWorks. You end up working on the How to Train Your Dragon TV show. And from everything you described, you said it's an overwhelmingly positive experience. You learned a lot. The people there were very kind to you. And it was one of those experiences that it sounds like when you're coming out of school, this is something that you had envisioned. You come in as a storyboard revisionist where it's more towards, I guess you called it like the bottom of the chain of command, where you would go up eventually to become a storyboard artist and so forth and so forth. But it sounds like a really good entry level position. And I think the nuance here is, as you'd said, when you're on a television show like that, your work only lasts as long as the season lasts. So you have work for about 9 months until it's time to either get renewed for season 2 or you have to go find the next role. And you had transitioned out of that role into DreamWorks, and you end up going into a role with Disney, which sounds like it would be everybody's dream in animation to end up there. But it was quite the opposite in your case. And your story about your first day at Disney, I think, just sets the tone perfectly. You had to sneak into the building just to get to Disney on your first day. Can you go into that story a little bit for the audience? I
Yeah.
couldn't even imagine if that was like my first day. I think I would have gone home.
Oh God, the first day was a train wreck. Um, Usually, when you go in for your first day, there's some there's some amount of organization to the whole process. Usually, you don't even work on your first day at most corporations. You
Yeah.
have some kind of all orientation where they give you a tour of the building, they show you your computer, all these things. Um, Basically, how I find out that I'm getting hired is through an email from the line producer of the show I was working on, and she gives me a start date. So I show up on my start date, um, but Disney has security and processes on how get into the building, and she didn't send me any of that. So I I tell the guard that I'm working at this studio, and he like looks me up in the system, and he goes okay, and he lets me into the parking lot, so I park. Um, but I don't know what to do next because you need a key card, a pass to get into the building, and I don't have that. All I have is the phone number of the line producer, so I call her. She doesn't pick up. So I'm just like waiting outside the building, confused. So I just follow someone else into the building who has a key card. They open it and they kind of look at me funny, but like I just like slip in behind them. Um, and because there's no one to greet me and I have no idea where I am really, I just start wandering around the building, trying to find the production I'm supposed to be at. Usually it's decorated thematically according to the show. So I'm just trying to find the place. And eventually someone sees me just wandering around confused and I'm like, can I help you? So I'm like, it's my first day. I work at this show. So they guide me to the general direction of that show. Someone eventually from that show realizes that I'm the new girl essentially, and it's like, oh, you're the new person. Hi, let me bring you to your desk. So they bring me to my desk, and I sit there, and I'm like, I can't log into the computer because I don't have a username or pass. They don't they don't give you one until you go through orientation. There's a little what do you call it? Paper on my desk that says to log on to the computer, call this number on your work phone, and there is no work phone. I'm like looking around my desk and I'm like, where's my work phone? Um, so I end up going into random cubicles until I find someone who can help me, who has a phone, and she somehow gets me access to my computer. So okay, I'm at my computer. I figure out how to log into my email, and I have all these meetings all these meetings already set for the day, and I have no idea where they are. I have no idea if I'm supposed to be part of the meeting. I am like, I guess I have work like right now. So I remember I had a meeting for my first assignment where they just kind of went, "Hey, how are you doing? You're the new person. Here's your work." And I'm like, "Okay, I don't really understand what I'm supposed to be doing, but okay." And then there was this all hands meeting. I don't even know really what it was, but I go in there and I see like this giant conference table and a few people sitting at the table. And since I'm new, I was like, okay, I guess I'll introduce myself. Um, I sat at the table and I like reached out my hand and I was like, "Hi, I'm Janet. I'm new to the show." And they're like, "You're not supposed to sit here." And then I'm like, okay, I think I told this story a little wrong. They looked at my hand, didn't take it, looked at me up and down, and was like, "You're not supposed to sit here." And I was like,
Oh my
"Okay,
god.
okay." And I sat not at the conference table. I sat on like a side chair and just kind of like stared off into space until everyone else showed up to the meeting. I didn't learn until much later on that that was the director's table, where only the directors and the producers and the higher echelon people of the show were allowed to sit. Partly because that had never existed in any studio I've ever worked for, like designated spots for certain people to sit in, depending on your hierarchy in the company. So I was thoroughly confused. And also, what a way to treat someone on their very first day who you don't
Yeah.
know. And I just felt like you could have corrected me in a much kinder way. But that kind of gave me an inkling of how the culture at that company was going to be for the rest of my time working there.
I'd say so.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Oh my! I'm sorry you had to go through that. That uh, that's such a. It's funny in hindsight. It's one of those stories that's really funny in hindsight, but in the moment, I can only imagine. It just, I'm sorry that happened to you,
Yeah.
but yeah, it certainly did set the tone. And as we've seen with the story, you end up leaving Disney eventually, and the part of the story that I really want to focus on is the suppression of creativity, because I think that's something that it doesn't really matter what field you're in. You could be in any field, but at the end of the day, no matter what field you're in, you might have to suppress your own personal creative side in return for being at the job longer or spending longer hours at the job if it requires that. In this case, your job was built upon being creative. That's what you're there to be there for. That made no sense, but we'll ignore that. That's why you're there. And it's that corporate chain where you have people in charge of the project who might not have any idea what it means to be creative, but they're taking a look at their bottom line at the end of the day when the production's all done, it's been in the box office, it's been on TV, and they're saying, "Okay, these aspects of the show or the movie are increasing our sales. We need more of this in the show." And it's suppressing certain creative ideas that you might have a vision, but it will never come into fruition because that's just the system that's built. And you were able to take a stand and you said, "I'm not going to do this anymore. I believe in myself. I'm going to take this chance on myself. I've been building this business for the past couple of years and I'm ready to go full time into this." Other people aren't willing to take that risk. And I think that leads to a sense of lack of fulfillment and definitely unhappiness as they get later on in life and they realize to themselves that I should have taken that chance when I had the opportunity, but I didn't. And now here we are. What do you think it is about yourself? I know we've described you as very determined. You believe in yourself a lot. I think those are definitely contributing characteristics. But do you think there was any other separating factor between you being able to take that stand and take that chance on yourself and something that might be lacking or something that might scare other people from doing the same exact thing?
Risk assessment. I
Yeah.
think I have always been a really huge risk taker in my life. Just being able to uh, say, no, I don't want to go the traditional path that everybody wants me to go in, which is something. regarding math, academia, whatever. A obviously more stable way of life, I guess. And being like, no, I don't care. I know that's what you want for me, but I'm willing to take that risk. I'm really willing to shoulder that risk, whatever may happen. I did that knowing that I could never have worked in Hollywood. I could have never have gotten became successful. I could have been a penniless artist and had to figure out how to make a living doing anything else. Um, I think as you get older, um, this is what I found with people who have reached success with the arts, um, and then realizing it that like working a corporate job uh, or doing whatever creative thing is never going to be as creative as what you would do on your own. Um, I think people get really scared of the risk of going out and doing something new because they already took so much risk. They already took the risk to pursue their dreams and they achieved their so-called dreams, and it's not exactly what they imagined it to be. But they had already put so much of their pride and their identity and sometimes money and into it to kind of admit to yourself and to others that like maybe this isn't what I wanted, maybe I was wrong, and then to go pursue something else. You have to have You're going to take a lot of criticism and you're going to take a huge hit to your pride, and in a lot you have to say that you were wrong, and a lot of people can't admit that. And on top of that, there's a huge financial risk once you get to that age where you're supporting yourself. You know you're giving up a pretty sizable amount of income for something that's completely not guaranteed. I think to be able to do in a what other people might call a stupid risk, take a stupid risk, make a stupid decision like that, um, for nothing. Like you could end up poor, you can end up penniless, you can end up having to go back with your tail between your legs. You have to consider all those things, and when you start considering all those things, it just doesn't become practical, and you become so scared. But for me, when I look at all of that, I go, but like at what cost? Um, if I stay here, if I stayed at the company and stayed in this career that I absolutely hated, um, that I was burning myself out over, I was experiencing health issues and the beginning stages of depression. Um, it would have only gotten worse. My health issues would have just increased. My depression would have gotten worse. Um, I can imagine my life as a lot of my peers, my coworkers at the time, who were maybe in their 40s or 50s, or even retired, like who have gone on to teach and stuff like that. And I can imagine myself in their shoes and go, do I want that life? Where I know you're not happy. I I know
Yeah.
that like maybe you've got have a family now. Like the older you get, the bigger that risk is. um, you might have a family, the job might pay more. You might have climbed the ladder to a certain point where it seems even stupider to take that risk.
Yeah.
And I was like, what? I'm in my late 20s. The risk is going to be even crazier when I'm 40. Like, I might as well do it now.
I think risk aversion is definitely a key trait to possess. But I think the other thing about your story that's amazing is your ability to forward think, where you could put yourself in the shoes of a coworker who is late into their 40s or their 50s, and you can realize that when you get to that point, it's not easy. You have much more responsibilities. Maybe by that point, traditionally, there's a lot of families built by that point. There's a lot more responsibilities in terms of maybe you have a mortgage, maybe you have a car payment. It's not as easy to just quit and pursue a passion in that way. And a lot of young people like to say, "Oh, just live in the now. Nothing's guaranteed. Tomorrow's never guaranteed. Just live in the now." And I love that. I love that mentality to a degree. I think everything's good in moderation. Where I definitely think, yeah, you can put down work for a little bit and go spend some time with friends, go travel. You don't want to miss out on those things when you're young. but you have to be forward thinking. And what I love about the way that you did it, and it's something that I'm trying to emulate myself, is you didn't just say, all right, I'm done, I'm going to go. And you didn't have any system in progress. You didn't have any systems built to pursue this side endeavor, which you transitioned into making full time. You had been building the processes over time. You've been seeing what works and what didn't work. And you even said it in one of your videos, or it was a podcast, where you said you took this chance and you knew that for 2 years you'd be fine, where you could do this for 2 years, and you knew that if everything went completely awry, that you could go back and you can get the job again. You were ready for this to happen. I think that's where a lot of young entrepreneurs and a lot of young kids get confused, is they just take that leap. They don't think about their consequences. They don't have that forward thinking within them, where they say, yeah, you're right, I don't want to climb the corporate ladder, I'm going to go build something completely on my own. Sure, sometimes it works. Sometimes lightning strikes, lightning hits the bottle and you catch it. But a lot of the time it doesn't work. And you have to be ready, and you have to be savvy enough to plan what could possibly happen. And I love how financially savvy you are. It comes across in a lot of your work too. And I think it's a very underrated aspect of the art community, especially, where people just try to put their name out there and they don't really think about how they can monetize in different ways. You've been very open about different ways that you try to monetize, whether that be going to conventions, trying to sell your artwork online, working in the NFT space, trying to not have AI replace artists, but leverage AI to help with your own personal work. There's a lot of different avenues that you can take. What's one thing that, to artists specifically, do you think is a surprise when you got out there on your own and you started doing it by yourself? Was there something that caught you off guard that you might not have been prepared for, that you didn't account for? Or do you think that you were really prepared to take that leap?
Early on, I think the reason why I tend to be so prepared, outside of it being my personality, is I learned early on that um, you have to grow anything that you do. You have to kind of cultivate it and give it the love and attention that it deserves. Whether you are networking to get a job, like people think of networking as like you go to an event, you find some recruiters' phone numbers and or emails, and you email them for a job. I like to, when people ask me like how did you break in, I want to break in, I tell them that like it takes a while. It takes a longer than you think. And networking, you should see it more like you're making friends. You don't just meet someone and go like, hey, we're best friends.
Yeah.
You have coffee with them, and then you have to grow that relationship and build that trust. And that's with that's with everything. I realized that's one of the most important things I took from, I guess, breaking into the industry, that I have applied to everything else. That my mistake when I was going to school was thinking that I'll have a job, or I'll start looking for a job once I graduate. Whereas it should start the minute you go to college. You should start building those connections and um, making yourself known to people, so that they can know that you're not crazy. They know that you're willing to learn and to grow, and yeah. Um, so realizing that, like, okay, if it takes so much time just to break into the industry, just to grow my craft and build these relationships with people, and then I realized that, well, that's the same case with business. If I were to do that for myself, if I were to do everything that I did at work for myself, it starts from zero. It starts from proving, like, getting my name out there by going to conventions, going from no one wants to buy my work because I'm a nobody, to people willing to shell out hundreds of dollars for my work because they know who I am. um, that doesn't just happen because, like, people think that, oh, you get a social media account and you do a few things and all of a sudden you might go viral, and then you're set for, like, it takes, like, you might go from 10 likes to 100 to 200, something like that. And that is what I love, like, the process of getting there, knowing that I went from zero, knowing that at one point no one gave a shit about who I am,
Yeah.
that like at one point I sucked at doing something, and then getting incrementally better, and feeling that amount of pride that I get from seeing myself get better, like it truly isn't for anybody else but myself at a certain point. um that where my motivation comes from. um Applying that to literally every aspect of my life has made, I think, trying to chase after anything a lot easier, because then you're not so scared of starting from zero, and you're not necessarily so scared of like the hardship. In a weird way, I'm a little masochistic in that I kind of enjoy when it's hard, because I can
No,
see how far I've come, um, or like having overcome that hurdle.
that's something that I still try to work on myself is with this podcast. This is my thing where I've started from zero. Before I did this, I didn't have a social media account, like not even like a personal like Instagram. I did when I was like a sophomore in college, and like my best friend ran it because I was too nervous to actually run it myself. It it was something for me that was breaking out of my comfort zone, and we're still at that point where it's like zero. Like I'm trying to work on building that attention for myself, and I don't like when people try to demonize it, where they say, "Oh, it's kind of selfish that you're trying to put yourself out there." It it is, but I think you all have to be selfish to a degree. You have to take care of yourself, and you have to put yourself in the position that you want to be if you want to grow into something. And I think where my generation gets confused a lot is they think everything just happens at the snap of a finger. They think that if they put in a little ounce of work, maybe something will just happen overnight, and that'll be it. People will not want to work for more than like 90 days at a time, and then they'll just give up. They don't want to put in that effort to see something that could be amazing grow into what they actually think that it could be. And I scrolled through your Instagram for hours just looking at all the pictures that you had posted. You posted like a little comic. I think it was like in like 2015. It was called like Food Fight. It was just like something like so like innocent, but it was so like I could just sense you in it. It was yours. It was something that you created from scratch, and it was just something that was so beautiful because it was your identity. It was something that you wanted to create, and then all the characters that you had drawn. I've been getting into anime recently. I'm like a fake anime fan, so I saw like all the Attack on Titan characters, but I got to get deeper into anime. But again, just seeing your progress build up and up to this point now, where you're able to do this, and you have complete autonomy over what goes on. But you had to put in the legwork. You had to tell yourself, I'm not going to give up. I'm going to keep fighting. I'm going to keep staying true to what I believe in. And I think you said it on a podcast recently where you're talking about just the difference between millennials and Gen Z, where millennials are like narcissists, but Gen Z, they're just trying to find their identity. They're trying like all these things. They're trying to like take all these pieces from older generations, and they're trying to create like a hodgepodge of who we think that we are. And we're not trying to carve our own personal identity. And when you said that, I was like, you're right. And I see that in myself where I'll tell myself like, oh, I should have been born in the 80s. This music's fantastic. Instead of like trying to like create my own style or trying to find something that our generation comes up with. I think it has to do with that sense. You talked about it too, where there's this sense of we don't care as much as older generations did. We don't take as much. I don't think pride's the right word, but we don't focus in on our own work as much. We're completely content with just being like this hive mind mentality where we just go with the latest trend and we'll adopt that as our own personal style for a little bit, and then we'll move on to what's next. We don't really take ownership over something that's ours. And of course, there's always exceptions to the rule. I don't even want to call it the rule, but just the masses, I definitely see that. But there are the outliers. And I think those people are the ones that are going to shine and they're going to thrive, especially in this world that's ever changing. And again, I can't applaud you enough for being one of those guiding lights in the world to help shape what is yet to come. Um, one of those things that I want to comment on too is sometimes when people reach that level that they want to go to, and you've talked about this working in Hollywood especially, is the ego that might come along with reaching that status. And it was something that turned you off from being in LA in general and being in the industry. What do you think it is about achieving status? And you said it in one of your videos too, where you become so well known in the industry. Like once you leave the building for the day, nobody knows who you are. But when you're in that environment, you're top dog. You're the person, and you feel like everybody's going to be like bowing down and just kissing your feet. Why do you think people get that way? And how do you think people can avoid doing that? Because you've certainly avoided doing that. You've reached this point where you can be that big dog and be like, you're still in the environment. I built this on my own. This is my thing. You should be kissing my feet, but you're not doing that. You're humble, and you're helping other people achieve their dreams too. So what do you think made you successful in doing that?
I think validation seeking is really normal behavior, and it's what motivates people.
Mm-hmm.
I think about the differences between what I perceive the art industry used to be like prior to me, prior to Millennials and my experience with it. And I can only assume from my teacher's explanation of what it was like that it was a lot more mature. And it came from a place of um, they wanted to do it not because it was satisfying some kind of validation seeking behavior, but because they really love creating or painting or whatever it was. Um, and for me, I think the way I would have been able to avoid it is getting in touch with the real reason why I do what I do, um, or why I want to do what I do. Um, and that also means coming to terms with all the hurt and, for lack of a better word, trauma or anxieties in your life that you grew up with. So for me, it was needing to prove myself to my community, my family specifically, and I think specifically for artists, that's the case. When you are looked down on, usually in a high school environment where you're not exactly the cool kid, um, you when you get success at an older age, all that hurt comes back in validation seeking behavior, and sometimes bullying behavior. You want to prove to people who hurt you or that you're better than them in some ways. You want to prove, this is very common in Hollywood specifically, you want to prove to your family back home that you weren't a failure, that you weren't crazy by moving to LA and being like, I gotta go work in Hollywood. You actually did it. So when you do find success, and I think a lot of that comes out, and I've come to a place where I don't feel too angry at people who do that because I know it comes from a place of hurt. It comes from like whatever childhood baggage that they're holding. I think for me, I I still get angry when people make assumptions about my motivations or what I do. But I think when I know I'm truly just doing it because I love it and for myself and for, like, in a weird way, like, because I'm a creative person, every creative project to me is like my baby. If I'm as prideful of it as having children, and it I remember telling that to one of my coworkers at work, and he had kids at the time, and he understood. He was like, "Yeah, you put as much effort into like your convention business and all this stuff as much as I do with putting my kids to sleep." Like I think if you're truly doing it for uh it's weird to say, it's both selfish and selfless reasons. It's selfish in that like it's for myself, but it's selfless in that like there's no there's no ulterior motive to it.
Yeah.
I think that's how you can like keep centered and keep sane, and just always just keep working on yourself. That's I always, whenever I get too upset, I always ask myself, why am I upset? And that usually comes back to like a flaw of my own that I need to deal with. It doesn't have anything to do with anyone else.
Yeah. I heard it in Rick and Morty of all places. I think it was the episode where like the meteors are like trying to kill the dinosaurs, and Rick is like about to blow up the meteors, and he was like, selfless and selfish are two sides of the same coin. And I was like, that's a good one, Rick. It's true, but we look at it as if it's a bad thing. But it's good to do things just because you want to, and sure, it gives you like a little sense of like, oh, that felt good. who cares? Like it feels good. It's just natural. And I'm glad that you feel that way, and I'm glad that you're open about it and you're sharing about it. Um, I want to finish off just with one of the coolest things that I think you're doing is you got up and left. You left LA and now you're out in Arizona and you are doing something that I've always thought about doing and I still think about doing to this day, which is just building a nice little cabin in my own little plot of land and just living away from all the noise and nobody is around to just poke eyes at me or try to see what I'm doing. You're just doing exactly what you want to do and you're doing it on your own terms. How's the renovation going? I know you've been posting videos about all the renovating that you're doing. Is it just a fun little project for you at this point? Is there any challenges that you didn't expect? And overall, when it's all said and done, what do you think like the end goal is? Do you think you're going to be there like forever, or do you think it's just going to be for like a nice period of time?
Well, the end goal is when we moved here, me and Vincent said we want to create a creative paradise where if we wanted to make music, we could do that. If we wanted to write, we could do that. If we wanted to draw and make comics, we can do that. If we wanted to make short films, we can do that. Um, we want to make it into that kind of place that makes other people feel like, oh, I want that too. And if they wanted to come visit us, like our creative friends who want to have like a little retreat or oasis away from the city, where because we found that every home we've lived in, we've kind of created an environment like that for us. And when our friends would come over, it they would feel like, oh, I feel so peaceful. I feel like this is like such a great place to be able to like be free and do whatever we want to do. Um, Ideally, that's the kind of environment we wanted to make. Um, that's what I would call my dream home. I don't really think if I can see myself living here forever because I don't know. I've learned with
Yeah.
my previous tendencies to make 10-year plans and stuff like that that who knows, I might quit Disney one day. Um, I think I only know what I like to do now. And the renovations every day is there are unexpected things every day. Like there was a storm that like took out our patio deck thing, and I have to deal with that. And it's a huge learning curve for me. But as a result, I've gotten really into real estate. Uh, it's because I enjoy creating these like creative retreat environments. It's something I've been thinking about maybe uh, doing that again and again and again with other properties, um, and stuff like that. But yeah, I think we're getting there in terms of um, turning it into that because we're starting to make a lot of music now. Just silly indie bedroom pop music in Vincent's music studio in a spare bedroom. I'm writing a lot more. We're doing the podcast still. It's really become a place where we have, I feel, complete freedom to do what we want. And I think as an artist, that's what we all truly want. Maybe that's what everyone truly wants.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, that's the goal. That's the dream.
I know peace is the one word that you used in there that you want to have your environment feel like. Just watching your videos, it makes me feel at peace, knowing that there's somebody out there who is really just doing what they want to do and building their environment to make it the way that they do. So I can't thank you enough for joining me for today. It's been such a pleasure. All your socials will be down in the description for the video and for the podcast version on Spotify and Apple. I highly encourage everyone to go check out your content. You and Vincent's podcast is both hilarious and informative. It's quite the combination. And again, I can't thank you enough. Final question for today is if there's somebody listening who was in your position like you were when you were in your early 20s and they're going down that road and they're saying to themselves, do I take that chance on myself or do I keep going? What's your advice for them right now?
I would say you're young. you're extremely young, and you should take the risk to do what you want to do with your life, because you don't know if you'll regret it if you don't. Because whatever safety you're trying to stick to is always going to be there. You can always find a job. You will always be able to like support yourself, and you're not gonna. What I really needed to hear is you're not gonna end up homeless. Um, you're a perfectly capable human being. You gotta believe in yourself a little bit. But that doesn't. I'm not gonna say that you shouldn't like just throw everything away right now and like go do whatever you want. You gotta do it smart too. You gotta like make some plans and make sure you land on your feet just in case. Um, but yeah, I think people are so risk averse. They're too risk averse when you really should take risk when you're young.
Once again, I can't thank Janet enough for joining me for today's conversation. It was such a pleasure and such a powerful message on the absolute importance of staying true to yourself and not settling down for something lesser than you know that you are worth. Such a powerful message. Once again, if you enjoyed today's show and you want to see even more incredible conversations, please follow along and leave a rating is the best way to help grow the show. And I can't thank you enough for tuning in for today's show. It is such a privilege to be able to put this on for all of you. It really is. Until next time, I'll see you.